For centuries, people have romanticized about a special pair of magical shoes that would suddenly change them into someone brand new. Perhaps this odd attraction to shoes is why Cinderella continues to be one of the most popular and best-loved fairy tales of all time. Did you know there are over 700 versions of this ancient tale? Some claim the story originated around 200 BC in China, and others attribute its creation to Aesop while a slave in Egypt. However, one of the oldest stories, if not the oldest Cinderella story, can be found within the pages of the Bible. It was penned by the prophet Ezekiel. When Ezekiel was charged with the unenviable task of confronting Jerusalem with her detestable behavior, he chose to write the allegorical tale of a fallen Cinderella. Ezekiel 16 is a powerful story of the transforming love of the great king who sees a discarded infant thrashing about in the bushes and, despite her helpless state, chooses to love her. In the same way that God once chose a small and insignificant land to be his special possession, Ezekiel uses graphic language and strong visual images to paint a picture that he hoped would open their eyes to God's great love for them. He wanted Jerusalem to identify with his fallen Cinderella and return to the king. It is my prayer that you come face to face with that same king in this fairy tale remix of Ezekiel's fallen Cinderella. And as all good fairy tales, it begins with once upon a time. Once in a land ruled by a mighty and gracious king, a tiny infant girl was born to two very undeserving parents. Her father was a bully, intoxicated with his own strength, and her mother was a haughty, self-absorbed woman with no need for a delicate newborn. So on the day she was born, her parents decided to toss her out, dirty, unwashed, and naked, into a field like a pile of rubbish. That day, the ever-vigilant king and his mighty men were conducting an inspection of the land's borders. When the king dismounted to check the boundary markers, he heard the faint cry of an infant. Following the sound, he came upon a newborn flailing in the bushes. Tenderness melted his stately exterior as he lifted the newborn baby from the weeds and wrapped her in his cloak. The royal guard protested, "Your Majesty, it is just a discarded peasant, hardly worthy of your time or effort." The king's silence spoke volumes, gazed intently into the child's tiny eyes, and spoke a single word that would set in motion all of the events that would ensure her survival. Live. As time passed, the child grew into a spirited young woman, also strong and nimble. She lived a wild, wounded existence. One bright day, the sounds of approaching travelers caught her attention. Halting her movement, hoping not to be noticed, she watched the passing entourage from a safe distance. Among the group was the king. Her unkempt hair and layers of grime marked her as one who had lived a difficult life. She was more to be pitied than desired, full of potential, yet going nowhere. Standing there in the shade at the field's edge, she was a diamond in the rough. The king recognized her instantly. His only hope in that moment was that she would not run away. He dismounted slowly and approached with great care. With amazing tenderness, he looked into her eyes and spoke softly. "When I first saw you in this very field as a helpless, abandoned child, I knew you must live, and you did. I loved you dearly then. How can I help but love you now?" Once again, he threw his cape about her and asked her to be his queen. She was speechless. "Why me?" she thought. "I have no kingdom, no wealth, no land, no family, and certainly no dowry." Her face brightened, and her fears began to fade when she realized the king loves me. Unexpected delight and joy flooded her parched heart and swept away every trace of despair. The slight smile on her lips broke into gleeful laughter because warranted love and compassion of the great king washed away the pain of abandonment. She could scarcely contain herself for joy. The king, her Prince Charming, lavished her with wonderful gifts. He presented her with the finest perfumes, fragrant oils, the most beautiful garments, costly fabric, rare and elegant jewelry of gold and silver, and a magnificent crown for her head. Then he himself placed upon her feet the most exquisite pair of shoes, crafted from the finest material available, the same material that housed the tabernacle of God. Word of her fame spread quickly throughout the land. No longer unwanted, she was his princess, his queen. The discarded infant girl had become queen. Fairy tale dreams do come true. She lived happily in the splendor of the royal court. She gave the king many sons and daughters. They loved each other deeply, and doubtless everything could have gone forever and ever. And as we say in the fairy tales, they lived happily ever after. Could have been a reality, except she began to forget the king and what he had done for her. You see, the most peculiar thing happened. The queen fell in love with herself. She acted as if she deserved the king's attention and merited his favor, trusting in her own beauty and the things he gave her, led her to take his love for granted. The attention of her admirers and would-be lovers flattered her. Soon their admiring glances meant more to her than the love of her kingly husband. Sneaking out of the castle to follow them, she used the gifts her husband gave her to buy their affections. She brazenly declared, "The king is simply not enough." Eventually, she abandoned the king. Absolute betrayal and dramatic flair. She threw his love back into his face. She forgot his extravagant love. In exchange for his faithfulness and devotion, he was overwhelmingly rejected. Disbelief hung on his lips as he repeated again and again, "How could you? How could you? How could you do this to me and to our children?" With great heaviness of heart, the king confronted her. Like mother, like daughter, you either neglect our children or you use them as pawns to get what you want. At first, you snubbed your parents and your sisters. You loathed their polluted lives and how they exploited the poor, but gradually you took on their ways. Now, your own actions are far worse than theirs ever were. In fact, you make your two sisters look good in comparison. You leave me no choice but to expose you for what you really are. I'm going to strip you bare. I'm reclaiming all of your fine clothing and dazzling jewels. I'm sending you back to where you came from. When you finally face who you truly are, you will realize how much I have loved you. And then you will remember. And when you do, I will forgive you. And I will take you back so fast, it will take your breath